All right. So my name is Dan Siemon with Preseem. Jeremy and Joshua are here today. We'll give them each an opportunity to introduce themselves in a second. But at a really high level, what we're kind of hoping to do here is let everyone hear from someone using Preseem and not hear from us. So I think it's a lot more educational and to see how people are using and hopefully getting benefits than listening to us talk at a high level. So hopefully Jeremy and I are here to answer some questions and we'll get some conversation going. But mostly this is going to be Joshua talking a little bit of his experience with Preseem and even welcome to go more widely your tidbits and other interesting experiences with your ISP as a whole. So thank you very much for joining. Maybe Jeremy, you want to introduce yourself and then we'll
Sure.
pass it off to Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jeremy Austin. I'm not from Canada. I'm from Alaska, and I've been working with Preseem about 18 months or so now. And I really have had a hand in the Preseem Plus features that we brought out in March. And so I'll definitely be able to answer any complicated questions about that. But again, we're really hoping to hear from Josh and how he's been able to operationalize both Preseem Essentials and Preseem Plus in his ISP. So I've got 20 to 25 years of history in ISP and wireless. So I've been around, done a lot of different things at different sizes, rural, everywhere from rural to urban, small to the kind of largish, medium-sized ISPs. So if any of you are operators here, you'll I think really enjoy some of the features that we brought out. So, and Josh, over to you.
All right, thanks, guys. My name is Josh. I am the operations manager for a WISP in Northwest Colorado. We're called ZIRKEL Wireless. ZIRKEL has been around since about 2001. We are a Cambium-based WISP. We currently have about 27 tower sites over about an 1,800 square mile coverage area. We serve about 3,600 or so customers across our network. So we're not a massive WISP by any means, but we've definitely had our fair share of growth. I guess growing pains over the years. I've been with ZIRKEL since 2012, and so I'll be hitting 10 years here in a couple months. Admittedly, prior to working with ZIRKEL, I had never worked in the ISP space, so this has been my first and only foray into the industry. But I've definitely learned a lot over the years, and have been in a fortunate position of being able to provide value to the company in a lot of different ways. I started off as just doing traditional sales and support with customers, and then was able to quickly find ways to optimize our systems and add new services. So when I first started, we had one internet plan. It was 3 megabits per second download and 1 megabit per second upload. And then we quickly started adding more plans over the years. Then we started adding a managed Wi-Fi service and VoIP and TV streaming, now security cameras. And we've grown the team. When I first started, we had a team of about 6 people, and now we've got a team of about 17. So not, once again, a massive team, but it's definitely been an opportunity to see some growth over the years. Preseem specifically for us came along in 2020. So as most of you guys are aware, when COVID hit and sent everybody home, we saw an exponential increase in demand on our network. We live in a ski resort community. We're in Steamboat Springs, Colorado is our headquarters. And so typically we get really busy through the winter season when we have all the tourists and everybody in town. And then as we approach spring and early summer, so many people leave, even locals go on vacation. So we see a really big dip in bandwidth usage. But because of everybody working from home and doing schoolwork from home, and nobody being able to travel or leave, instead of seeing that normal dip in bandwidth, we saw an exponential increase in demand. And frankly, our network wasn't quite ready for it. Traditionally every year we use the 2 weeks around Christmas to base our demand for the whole next year. So where we see bottlenecks during those 2 weeks of Christmas is what we need to spend our summer build season going and addressing. So fixing backhaul capacity, adding access point capacity, upgrading switches and routers. And so most of our tower sites are sitting on the top of mountains and that we can only access during a few months during the summer. But what we started seeing is that demand from those 2 weeks of Christmas, we started seeing higher amounts of demand hitting in that March, April, May timeframe than we had ever seen before, number one. And two, we still could not access our tower sites to go and add additional hardware capacity. And so we were scrambling and looking for an opportunity to be able to manage our traffic and shape our traffic. And that's where Preseem really came into play. And so we hit the ground running, trying to figure out how to get Preseem added onto our network. And we got it loaded in. We went through and we added packet shapers to every one of our access points throughout the network. And we saw a dramatic improvement in the amount of bandwidth that was being consumed. And we saw slow speed calls go down considerably. It was just a huge impact immediately. So from 2020 through basically earlier this year, we were largely using Preseem to find access points and equipment that were being tapped out. And when I say tapped out, there's two primary areas that we would always look at. We would look at equipment that was hitting 100% frame utilization. So if you have any more demand coming into an access point that's already hitting 100% frame utilization, it pretty much just gets dropped at that point in time. And so it was kind of a big lesson for us that by artificially decreasing the amount of bandwidth that you could apply to an access point, it would increase the access point's capability of providing a better experience, because latency would drop, retransmits would drop, all of the things that would normally equate with buffering and slow web page loads would essentially drop. And because of Preseem's ability to queue up traffic into certain ways, we would notice that the bulk downloads that people were doing, like system updates for their computers or downloading the latest video game, those downloads would start to slow, while the more chatty traffic like web page loads and voice over IP and Zoom calls, those things would continue to go off without a hitch by actually lowering the capacity on a piece of equipment. And that was just a huge insight and an eye-opener to us as a company. But then we started noticing that high latency within a customer's internal Wi-Fi environment. So if you had one customer that had their router sitting in their basement, but all of their devices were sitting two stories up with potentially some in-floor heating involved, and all of those devices have low signals, they're all using 2.4 gigahertz, lots of transmit, retransmits, lots of latency. One customer's poor internal Wi-Fi network could start dragging down the capacity of an entire access point. And so fortunately, for a few years there, we had been deploying a managed Wi-Fi solution, and we were able to pinpoint which customers were having the highest latency, log into their router, find some issues, and go in and fine-tune their internal network by either moving the router to a different location in the home or by adding some mesh booster access points. The other thing from a Wi-Fi perspective is if you have a ton of devices in your homes, like 25, 30, 40 devices, connecting in your home, the amount of RAM that you have on your router, the amount of CPU power that you have on your router has a really big impact. And so we started measuring what's called buffer bloat. There's just an online tool that you can go and measure buffer bloat, and you can determine how much of an impact your router's CPU and RAM is having on your ability to transmit packets within an internal network. And we found by upgrading somebody's router from, for example, a Wi-Fi 5 router to a Wi-Fi 6 router could have a dramatic impact on their latency and retransmits. And by fixing one customer's internal Wi-Fi network, we could improve the capacity on an entire access point. And Preseem was just instrumental in us being able to find those types of problems. Even with our managed Wi-Fi support cloud system, we didn't necessarily have the reporting tools to pinpoint which customers are experiencing the highest amounts of latency, whereas with the Preseem tools, we were. And so that was extremely powerful. And so that's what we were using, I'd say, since from the March 2020 timeframe through earlier this year, right around March 2022. I spoke with Rob over at Preseem the week before WISP America, and he was going over the new tools from the Preseem Plus feature set, and we were immediately, I was like, you know what, let's get those added. So the week of WISP America, we had it turned on and we're collecting data, and I went and got to learn from Jeremy and from Dan and from the rest of the team some additional insights about the new tools. And as I got back to town after that event, we had access to the new features, and it was really awesome to see what they had done. I mean, the work that they put into to improving this already fantastic system allowed us to then start saying, you know what, which access points on our network are performing the worst? And you can just quickly sort, hey, these are your worst performing access points. And we could just go in and start diving into the why. Is it because there's noise in the environment? Is it because there's one or two customers just dragging down the performance of it? Is it a hardware problem and we just need to go replace an access point that potentially has gone bad? One of the other things that I was going to mention a little bit ago, but I forgot, was CPU power. So there are times on an access point where even if you're not maxing out the frame utilization of an access point, if you're maxing out the CPU capacity on it, then you can't do anymore. And so we started upgrading some of our access points from Cambium 450 to Cambium 450i equipment because it had additional CPU power. And we would notice a dramatic increase there because now we could increase the shapers to start getting more out of the available frame by lowering the utilization of the CPUs. So we were able to extremely quickly find where were our problem children. The thing that I think had an even bigger impact for us is we didn't necessarily know which access points on our network had the most capacity to sell. So we would start sorting by subscriber capacity in the upstream direction. And we found that our network had the capacity to add somewhere close to 1,900 subscribers without our entire system being overloaded. Prior to adding the new Preseem Plus features, we knew that some access points on the network had capacity to go sell additional bandwidth, and we knew that some access points on the network were overloaded. But we were spending 10, 15 plus hours every week combing through a variety of systems to try to identify this. And with these new features from Preseem, it's a click of a button. It's like a sort feature that says, oh, here are the access points that have capacity that you can go sell additional subscribers or additional subscribers. And here are the access points that you maybe don't want to add any more customers to. And I was blown away by the number of access points that we had that had a tremendous amount of additional capacity. So using that information, we were able to create some really targeted marketing. We're working with a company, a local advertising company, to create digital programmatic ads. And so those are like the banner ads that you see on web pages as you're searching around the internet. We were able to see precisely which neighborhoods had the capacity for us to sell into. So we would go and create digital geofences around the neighborhoods that we knew we had capacity, and we would start injecting digital programmatic ads into those neighborhoods with really juicy offers that we could sell to, and we could avoid the neighborhoods that we did not have any additional capacity to. So that way our field technicians could really go and focus their labor on the areas and the neighborhoods that needed the most love, but we could focus our marketing efforts on the neighborhoods and areas where we immediately knew we could sell into. And I can't even tell you how powerful that in itself was. But in addition to being able to sort from an access point perspective, we're able to sort from a CPE perspective on which of our subscribers are having the absolute worst experience. And so we can create on a day-to-day or a week-by-week basis, we can create a list of our least happy customers, and we can actively or proactively go and try to fix their problems. There was a question of what advertising company we used. We're using a local company. We're in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. There's a company they're actually a customer of ours. They're called Fanbase. So it's a local steamboat company, but I'm sure that companies like them exist all over the place. We just like to try to do local whenever we can, especially because they are a subscriber of ours. But being able to proactively create a list of here are the customers that we need to spend time on, it allows us to then log into their radio antennas, see how they're performing, log into their managed Wi-Fi system within the home and see how the Wi-Fi network is performing. We can go and make adjustments and improvements to the internal Wi-Fi network. We can then schedule a service call if needed to go out and re-aim the antenna or switch them to a different band. For example, we could switch them from maybe an overloaded 5 gigahertz access point to maybe an underloaded CBRS, a 3.65 gigahertz access point. Or for some folks, we could look at, could we re-aim them to a different tower? But it gave us an action list of who exactly we need to be spending time on. Our whole philosophy as a company is, especially because of, as you guys are probably dealing with in many ways, the amount of competition coming into our markets is crazy. The amount of government money flowing, especially to the companies that are deploying fiber, is it's just something that we've got to deal with. In our neighborhood, we've got our local electric cooperative has probably received $50 million in funding through various grants and are laying fiber throughout our entire coverage area. And they're selling these really big pipes for, in some cases, lower than what we're selling our services for. And so what we have determined is our way to win in this environment is to give the best possible customer experience. And the way that we approach that is we try to be proactive in fixing customer problems before they ever pick up the phone. And so we spend, I'd say, a good part of our time combing through these systems and finding problems, fixing them, reaching out to the customer and letting them know that we have found a problem and fixed it, so that they get that loyalty factor of saying, wow, these guys just called me and fixed this problem that I may or may not even known about. And so with the hopes that they're gonna stay loyal and stay with us. But using these tools have really given us a tremendous amount of insight in how we can do that. And as I mentioned, being able to sort from an access point, even an access point by access point basis, you can click into an access point that's poor performing and figure out which customers are performing the worst on that piece of equipment. So not only do you know which access point to look at, you know which customers on that access point you need to go address first, but also from a customer by customer basis, who we need to address first. And that also, because we have our managed Wi-Fi platform, we can get additional insight into that internal environment. One of the things that we do is, if we find a customer that has really poor latency, really high retransmits, and they don't have one of our managed Wi-Fi routers, we'll reach out and give them a 3-month free trial on our managed Wi-Fi service and say, hey, will you let us put one of our routers into the home? That way we can get some additional insight into what's going on within the internal network. We can find out which devices are dropping the packets, which devices have low signals, whether you have any legacy 802.11g devices that are dragging down the performance of your 2 gig network. That additional insight allows us to then better support that environment, which then has a big impact on the access point's ability to meet its airtime requirements. I mentioned to Jeremy as we were getting started here that one of the things that he said at the WISP America event that really stuck with me was that we're not selling capacity, we're selling airtime. And by maximizing airtime, you need to make sure that all of your radios have great modulation, that they're able to get on and off the network as quickly as possible. And that doesn't only apply to an access point or a CPE, it applies to that internal Wi-Fi environment. If you've got a device that has a really low signal or is using a legacy part of the band, you need to be able to quickly determine, how do I fix this? How do I remove that poor performing device? How do I remove the retransmits? Because by doing so, you can create more efficiency within an internal environment, which thereby provides a tremendous amount of increased efficiency at the access point level.
Josh, do you want to show that principle in the UI here about finding these problem children?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
thank you for being willing to share your network with us, Josh.
Yeah, no worries. And so I'll just go ahead and click here. So as a highlight or as a high overview, we have, and I'm just looking at the questions here. Somebody had made the comment of which routers we're using. We personally use Calix brand routers. For a long time, we were using the Wi-Fi 5 Calix Gigacenters. Over the last couple years, we've been deploying their Wi-Fi 6 platform. It's a GigaSpire U6 router. I will say that Calix is not the cheapest solution to put on your network. Their support cloud requirements are kind of expensive. The hardware is not the cheapest, but we really try to go best in breed on what we do. I have loved the Calix platform, and their new Wi-Fi 6 platform is amazing. So that's what we use. But getting back to the Preseem screen here, as of right now, we have 191 access points that are deployed out on the network. I will say that there's 11 here that are showing as an error. What I have learned is that these ones that are showing as an error, those are because there's just maybe not enough customers using Preseem that have equipment deployed in the same configuration. We have some equipment that is using the 5.8 gigahertz STA part of the band, and most of these that are showing up as an error is because they're using a part of the band that maybe not a ton of other WISPs that are subscribed to Preseem are using. But ultimately, you can see that out of the 191, we have 152 with either an excellent or an okay health score. We have 15 that are in warning, we have 0 in critical, and then the 24 that are unknown are things that we just need to be able to collect a little bit more data on. And then from a subscriber capacity, out of our 191, we have 107 access points that have excellent subscriber capacity, which means they have a lot of capacity that they have yet to sell. And so once again, extremely quickly, I can just click on excellent and determine here are all of my access points, and I can move this to 100 per page. And you can even sort, I think right here, by capacity.
Right.
So you can determine, like, here are the ones that that have the most capacity to sell. And so I have here, just within a couple clicks, I know exactly which access points I have capacity to go self-service on. And I can then, using another system that we have, because we're a Cambium WISP, we use CN Maestro. I can go look in CN Maestro and see the propagation over a map as far as where this access point is covering. And I can start circling specific neighborhoods on where I want to go and do some targeted programmatic advertising. In that same vein, instead of clicking excellent, I can go and click critical. And these are the access points that I do not have any capacity to sell additional service on. And why is that? I mean, there could be a number of factors. We could just simply have to kind of shuffle things around. If you look at a tower, sometimes one of your access points gets more customers on it than maybe one of its neighbors. And can you just shimmy people over and get things a little bit more spread out? This could be because one of these access points have somebody that is dragging down the performance of the equipment, whether that be a high number of retransmits, a high number of, or a high amount of latency, and how can we fix that one particular customer? Because by fixing that one customer, we could potentially add the capacity to sell another 5 connections, or instead of -5, maybe we can bring it back to 0 or +1 or +2, just by fixing one subscriber on this. I will highlight in this particular list, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 access points in this list of 17. They are in an area on our network where we have another wireless ISP that is started up, and they've really cowboyed their deployments, and they are creating a tremendous amount of noise in the environment. And unfortunately for those 7 in particular, at this point in time, we don't really have a whole lot of options, because it's more of a noise problem than it is a signal problem. So that is something that we are actively working on. We're combination of deploying some additional types of equipment like CN Wave. We're obviously waiting for some 6 gigahertz and exploring some other options in that regard.
Maybe just for a little context for everybody else. So you mentioned that in a really noisy environment, the capacity count's lower. Jeremy, maybe it'd be useful just to explain for a minute what that capacity is. It's
Okay.
like how we build it and where it comes from and what goes
Yeah.
into it, because it's
And
very dynamic. It's not just a
absolutely.
static
And
threshold. Yeah.
and we've got a question from Larry C, basically saying, can you show a bad subscriber on a critical access point? And you talked, Josh, about the fact that capacity can be lower because you have customers that are hogging all the airtime. I think that first example is actually not bad. The one at the top of the list. Probably any of these in here, you'll find some. If you want to drill into one of these APs.
Yeah, I just clicked on one of them
Yep.
just to.
So then usually where I would go is to look at the connections list and sort them by impact.
Yeah, so we can see that the RF score is good. The
Overall,
health
RF score is pretty decent. Yep.
And it is riding right on the shaper that we've created, or at least that's the average that you see.
Yep.
But yeah, from here to Jeremy's point, you would just click on connections. Might be using up a little bit more of my RAM here. Let me just clean up my. Try to quit some stuff, make this load a little bit faster. So here are the connections that are on this particular access point. And then you can come in and just sort by business value, or I can come in here and add custom and add the RF score.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, if you clicked on RF score in the cards at the top, yep, you can show me. So let's just see the ones that are in a bad state here. So
there's only two that are
only two, yeah, on that one. So that's a pretty clean one. It had a pretty decent RF score overall. You know, it sounds like you're just running out of capacity on that AP.
Yeah. I'll actually approach this from a slightly different angle here. I'll look at the CPEs on the network that have a critical, and I'll see if I can drill into an access point. So for example, this customer is connected to this tower. He's got let me even go here, 0.
Oh yeah.
So let's click into, say, this access point. And so what's interesting about this access point is you can see latency excellent, subscriber capacity excellent, health score and RF score are good. But from a connection standpoint, we know that there's at least a couple that aren't happy.
Oh, so real outliers there. Oh, yeah.
So for the most part, everybody on this access point is happy and doing well, but this guy right here, not so much. And so we know that by addressing this one customer's connection, we can improve the capacity on this access point.
Sometimes dramatically.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the business value score is a combination of a heavy user and poor RF, which means they're using a lot of airtime. So there's more to it than that, but that's the simplest way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, we showed that chart back in WISP America, where it's surprisingly non-intuitive how much airtime a low modulation user will consume, because it's not a linear slope. It really just kind of falls off a cliff as modulation drops. And to go back to Dan's question about the subscriber capacity, so effectively what we do is we look at how much airtime is remaining, not just how much like theoretical bandwidth the AP has, but how much airtime is remaining, and looking at the modulations that you're actually achieving on that access point. We then say, if you were adding more customers and you don't improve their RF, here's how much capacity is remaining. So if you do both of those things, both improve the RF and add more customers, you know, I'm sorry, if you improve the modulation that the connected users are achieving, the amount of capacity that you can add will increase. And sometimes that's nonlinear, as we talked about. You know, if there's one or two customers that are dragging those modulations down on that AP, sometimes improving them will add more than 2 users. You know, that's where the real ROI comes in, where you can dramatically improve, in many cases, the capacity on your APs by improving the worst ones.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Dan?
Yes, sorry.
I think that was a head.
Yep, that was a head nod. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's as you can see while I'm clicking through here, it is just so easy to find the problem children. I know that using existing systems like I know CN Maestro was always a big one for us in the past. We would spend multiple hours every day combing through low signals. We would look at every single customer on an access point to determine who was dragging down the performance. And we would come up with, after 10 to 15 hours throughout the week, we would come up with a list that we could go and address the next week. And then you log into these radios the next week, and then you still are having difficulty on finding exactly what was occurring or why the problem was there.
Right.
And with these tools, it just becomes tremendously easy to figure out exactly where the bottleneck is, what's going on, and where you should be spending your energy. And so what we've done as an organization is we've implemented what we call the Preseem audit process. And so we've created a calendar. We've got 27 tower sites. So generally, one day of one business day of each week, we spend focusing on 1 or 2 towers, depending. If it's a big tower, we focus on the 1 tower. If it's a small tower, we can bundle a couple of them in together. But every single day, we have a member on our team spending at least 1, sometimes 2 hours combing through an entire tower. And we look at the access points. So for example, if I click over on access points and I just type in, MTW, our Mount Warner Tower. So here are all the access points on this tower. And I like to put I like to see the amount of airtime remaining.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can then sort by, on this tower, which access point has the least amount of capacity. Well, it's this first one. It's also got the least amount of airtime remaining. It's also got the worst health score. And so within less than 30 seconds, I know exactly which access point on this tower needs the most love. And do we need to go and start then diving into the customers that are on this access point? Do we need to start looking at it from a hardware perspective? Do we need to start looking at it? Because from there we can start looking at frame utilization. We can start looking at CPU utilization. We can look at the shaper. I know there was a message here that said something like, what do you focus shaping first, the subscriber or the access point? We definitely focus on shaping the access point first. But from this particular access point, which connections on here could we go and spend some time on to improve capacity? Now, if we were to look at this list and see that every single one of these are in the okay range, then what we might just need to do is try to pull a couple people off of this access point to improve the capacity. But for each one of these top 4 customers, we're going to log into their radio antennas and check the stats there. We're going to see if they've got one of our managed routers that we can log into and look at their internal Wi-Fi performance and recommend either a mesh booster or an upgrade to the Wi-Fi 6 platform or something along those lines. But we, within less than a minute, have determined on this tower which access point needs the most love and which customers need the most love. And now we've got an action item list that we can go and start spending time on.
And do you sometimes find like some of them would be like a truck roll if an antenna is tilted and it's not facing in the right way or something like that? Could be an outcome of finding those bad ones as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that, there's probably about anywhere between 25 to 30, 35-ish% of the ones that we find do require a truck roll. And that's because, either a radio has been knocked out of alignment. One of the things that we deal with is every spring, the trees obviously grow every year and they start getting new leaves on them. And so they start leaving out. And so there are times where the line of sight gets impacted. Another thing that happens within our coverage area is, I don't know how much other folks have seen this, but because we're in a ski resort town, there has been just a ridiculous amount of new home construction, new apartment building construction. And sometimes a building gets put up that blocks the line of sight of a radio antenna. And so now we got to go out to that location and get creative on where can we move this to regain our line of sight. And that's why we do this audit. Each tower gets audited at least once a month. And we're able to watch the progression of these changes over the course of a season, over the course of a year. And we do have a list, admittedly, we've got a list of customer connections that we really don't have many options for at this point in time. We're either waiting on some new technology or we're trying to get a new lease for a new tower site. And so it allows us to at least keep an action list of saying, here's what we're trying to do, or here's what we're waiting on. And we'll put notes on that customer account. And if that customer calls and says, hey, I'm experiencing such and such, we'll typically say, you know what, we've got an option, but it's not going to be here for a number of months. We'll go ahead and put a discount on your internet account for the next 3 months, because we know that your service isn't as good as it should be, but we are working on it. We apologize. Like, here's some discounted service for a couple months. So it allows us to at least be cordial and let the customers know that we know there's an issue, as opposed to them calling in and saying, I don't really know what's going on. And then we have to spend a tremendous amount of time going in and investigating that one account. The more proactive we are throughout this process, the better customer experience we can provide.
Right. And that's an interesting point that you made. You know, that one of the things that we were doing, if we talk about like the previous set of measurements, like the latency measurements and the loss measurements, those are they're kind of point in time measurements. If you were to watch the trend and you could predict which way things are going to go, in general, people are going to use more internet bandwidth, and so you know that over time that capacity is going to continue to drop. And the AP capacity numbers are really the first time that we've actually made like a prediction to say, here's how close you are to the point at which your performance is going to drop off. And we've had a question in the chat. Larry's wanting like an example of AP shaping. This might actually be a good opportunity to describe, why you would use an AP level shaper rather than just a subscriber level shaper.
Yeah,
because your customers have plan speeds, right? Do you sell a variety of plans?
Yeah, exactly. We have a variety of plans that we offer, and one customer on an access point could be getting 30 megabits per second down, or we even have a 50 megabit per second down plan, and then another customer on that access point could be getting 7 down.
Got it.
And so Preseem does shape a public IP to a specific bandwidth level.
Right.
We also use radius authentication in our system to authenticate a radio's speed plan, and we incorporate some burst bucket features. So typically if they're going to run a speed test or when they first get online, we like them to see faster than what the plan is rated for. But once they consume a certain amount of bandwidth, they kind of drop down to their sustained speeds. But what you need to do is you need to make sure that an access point that you're looking into isn't completely tapping out. Like I clicked on this access point because I know that there's a couple customers on here that can use some love.
Okay.
And this is
so because you're doing this dynamic shaping, you are doing maybe a little less shaping at the customer side and a little bit more in that last mile on the AP because of the nature of your plans. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And so this access point in particular is one of our 365, our CBRS Medusas. It has 75 customers on it. It is the access point on our network that has the most number of subscribers on a single piece of equipment.
Latency is looking pretty good, apart from those outliers.
Yeah, and so I mean, we can look at. I mean, just quickly, you can drill down to precisely which customers. Like this guy, not happy. We need to go
major
spend
problems.
some time looking at him. But what's nice about this is we can filter him out of the map. So if I hold shift and press it, I can kind of click him out of there, and then I can kind of go to the next one. So let me see, it's going to be, I think, this one. And then there's some spikes over on this kind of greenish yellow color, and then on this yellow, and maybe on this one here. And so we can see that just by basically pulling these
worst examples off
handful. So there's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 customers. Here are the rest. Out of the other 69 customers that are on this access point, the latency is looking really good. And so now I know within a matter of less than a minute which 6 customers out of these 75 are experiencing the highest amounts of latency. So I'll actually, as I'm doing this, I'll write down the IPs of these 6 customers, and then I'll go and start logging into their radio antennas. I'll start logging into their managed Wi-Fi systems, and we'll start making some proactive decisions as far as what needs to be addressed. Is it a Wi-Fi problem? Is it they're simply maxing out their bandwidth? If they're maxing out their bandwidth, for example, if they have a plan that's rated at 7 megabits per second and their demand is pegged at 7, we can open that up a bit. We can give them a little bit more, and hopefully that'll stop them pegging at that 7 and give some breathing room, and that'll lower their latency. It'll lower the number of retransmits, thereby making everything more efficient. So the shaping I have right here, and this is a good example right here, because what I'm seeing is even though they're just barely hitting the shaper, it's staying kind of right. Granted, it's right below, but it's kind of peaking out at about the 98% frame utilization. But there's no plateauing effect. There's no line sitting there at a pegged 100% frame utilization. Like, I'm okay with the access point hitting 98, 99, 100, even sometimes, as long as it's not plateaued there for a period of time. There's also the fact that this is a Medusa radio with multi-user MIMO, and so there is some multi-user MIMO impact that you have to take into account. The higher the frame utilization, the more the access point splits these customers into separate spatial parts of the access point. This access point has, I believe it's 8 separate antennas, so it can sort people into those separate antennas. And you actually have to log into the Medusa radio and see how people are sorted. It won't split people up into multiple spatial streams unless you start hitting those high frame utilization points. And so like I'm completely okay with this. This actually looks perfect.
Got it.
If this were hitting a peak of 80% frame utilization, but it was riding right along this shaper, I would say we're artificially decreasing capacity on this a little bit more than we should be. That we're kind of preventing people from getting everything that they could. And so if the frame utilization is pegged at 80, but we're rocking on the shaper, I'll increase that shaper a little bit. In the same token, if I had a majority of customers that during peak utilization, this like 7 to 11 p.m. time frame, if we saw a big spike in latency across the board on this, then what I would do is look at decreasing the shaper. I would look at lowering it to prevent people from getting quite as much.
A little more compression, but
yeah,
still
exactly.
improving still keeping the quality of experience. Good. We are getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to make sure that everybody gets in the questions that they have. Please, there in the Q&A or in the chat, because we're just gonna go for a few more minutes before we wrap this up. So just want to let everybody know, here's your last chance. If you've got questions for Josh or for the Preseem team, please get them typed there.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, Jeremy and Dan, I mean, do you guys have any other, as we wait for customer or folks that are viewing questions to come in, I mean, do you guys have any other just insight or input or things that you think I may have not covered?
Yeah, I guess mostly just thanks for my favorite feature is the subscriber capacity feature. So, because I said this to a lot of people, but the fact that like it combines data and behavior, like what we see in the real world across all our customers to make a prediction, and then ties it back to the usage within your ISP and all. And there was a lot of work went into collecting all that data and making it go. And it's just my favorite thing because it takes something so complicated and boils it down to a number that anybody in the organization can understand. I can add 5 subscribers. Yeah. They don't understand. Well, I've got 8% free airtime. Like, what does that mean, right? So So just thanks for focusing on that because I love that thing.
I'm glad you're using it and it's being useful for you.
Well, one of the I know, coming back to Dan, your comment there, prior to implementing these new features, I was having a discussion with one of our owners about. He said, how much capacity do we have to sell? Which access point, like how much capacity, what percentage of our network is overloaded that we can't sell on, and what percentage of our network do we have some additional capacity to go out and actively try selling? And the question for a long time was, I don't really know. Like, I feel like we don't have as much capacity as we think we do. But then as soon as we got these tools implemented, it's like, oh, wow, we actually have the vast majority of our access points are sitting in the excellent and okay, which means that we have a lot of capacity to go sell. We just need to be able to target those sales efforts into the specific neighborhoods or areas. And so it was so nice to be able to give an informed decision on that question that I had spent so much time trying to figure out prior to these new tools being added.
Awesome.
So Larry had a question about how much do we decrease throughput to when shaping an AP? My guess is, like, how do you pick a starting point for the AP shaper, perhaps, to rephrase that?
So I've just gotten a feel. So admittedly, when we first started implementing Preseem, we didn't really know what that magic number was. And so I went literally across the board and just applied a shaper. We knew that we were getting, for example, out of a traditional Cambium 450 access point, we knew that we were getting on average between 50 and 60 megabits per second of throughput. So what I did is I just went and applied like a 60 megabit per second shaper on every single 450 access point across the network. And then I let it sit for a couple days. And then I'd go back through and I monitored I went through every single access point and determined, is this hitting frame utilization or CPU utilization peaks? And then I started modifying it from there. And what we found is, because of the traffic queuing that I mentioned, where bulk downloads will get decreased during busy times and chatty traffic gets prioritized, we found that we were actually able to get more throughput out of most of our access points than we were originally thinking. And so on average, most of our Cambium 450 access points get shaped to right around 75 megabits per second. Some of them, because
in a 20 megahertz channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
In a
because it
20
would be
megahertz
very
channel.
based on the chip channel.
And then equipment that we have broadcasting in a 30 megahertz channel, we've been able to increase those shapers to about 95 megabits per second.
Yeah.
In some cases where we have just immaculately clean airspace and somewhat few subscribers, we've been able to increase it to a little bit more than 100 megabits per second. On our Medusa APs, we're able to increase it to anywhere between 120 to 150 megabits per second on those. So it's definitely, you definitely have to play with it, because there's also a couple 450 access points on our network that the airspace just isn't quite as clean. We don't have a really great channel to put it on to get it any cleaner. And so we've had to drop that shaper to sometimes 40 megabits per second. I think I even probably have one or two access points on the network that are shaped down to as low as 35 megabits per second.
Goodness.
And that's in specifically the area where we've got that other ISP just kind of like broadcasting equipment directly, kind of just aimed right at our face, basically. And so it's very dynamic. You have to, what we've done is we've trained our staff to say, hey, when you're looking at this customer connection, also look at the access point and look at, is it pegging out from a frame utilization or CPU perspective? And do we need to just decrease that shaper a little bit more than average?
Got it. Jose was asking how he could try Preseem Plus. We can certainly reach out to you and get you on the list for a trial. We'll definitely make sure that happens. Anybody who's on the call today, if you don't have Preseem Plus, or if you want to do that as part of a trial, please let us know, and we will make sure that you get on that list and reach out to you for that.
Great. Well, we're right up against the hour. Thank you very much, Josh. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Thanks.
everybody learned a little bit. And again, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks
so
having
much,
me.
Josh. It's been fun.
Yes.
Till next time.
Thanks, everybody.